Before we begin this journey into one of the most terrifying encounters ever documented in the Canadian wilderness, make sure to hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. What you're about to hear isn't just a campfire story. It's a documented account that changed the lives of everyone involved and remains unexplained to this day. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and in the winter of 1904, I was a fur trapper working the Northern Territories of Manitoba, Canada. I was 29 years old, experienced in the ways of the wilderness, and considered myself a rational man, guided by what I could see, touch, and understand. The forest was my workplace. Its dangers were calculable, and its rewards were tangible. Pelts that would fetch good money in Winnipeg come spring. I had no belief in spirits or monsters, or any of the old indigenous warnings about creatures that walked the frozen wastes. Those were stories to scare children and explain away the very real dangers of winter: starvation, exposure, predators, and the madness that comes from isolation. I was wrong about all of it. Our trapping company consisted of 6 men that winter, operating out of a main cabin roughly 80 miles north of the nearest settlement. We'd pushed farther north than most trappers dared, following reports of rich fur territories that hadn't been worked in years. The Cree people we'd encountered on our way in had warned us against it. That land is cursed, an elder named Makwa had told us, his weathered face serious in the firelight. The Wendigo walks there. It has walked there since before my grandfather's time. It is always hungry, and it never stops hunting. Our crew leader, a big Scotsman named Duncan MacLeod, had laughed at the warning. We've got rifles, we've got supplies, and we've got sense. No amount of ghost stories is going to scare us off from prime trapping territory. The other men had agreed. There was Thomas Brennan, an Irishman with a quick wit and quicker temper. Samuel Oakes, a quiet man from Ontario who'd been trapping for 15 years. Pierre Duchamp, a French-Canadian who knew the Northern Territories better than any of us. Henrik Larsson, a Swedish immigrant trying to earn enough to bring his family over from the old country. And myself. 6 men. Strong, capable, experienced. We thought we could handle anything the wilderness threw at us. We were fools. The cabin we claimed had been abandoned for at least 5 years, maybe more. It was solid construction, thick logs, a good roof, a stone fireplace that still worked. Someone had built it to last, then left it. That should have been our first warning. You don't abandon a well-built cabin in prime trapping territory without reason. Previous owner probably died, Duncan said, examining the interior. Old age? Accident? Who knows? Their loss is our gain. We'd moved in early November, when the first serious snows began to fall. The plan was to trap through the winter, accumulate furs, and head back to civilization in March, when the ice began to break. 4 months of isolation, hard work, and cold. We'd all done it before. This time would be no different. Except it was different from the start. The forest around our cabin was too quiet. I noticed it the first week, but dismissed it. Winter forests are often silent. The birds have flown south, the bears are hibernating, the smaller animals are hidden in their burrows. But this was a different kind of quiet, an expectant quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The trap lines we set up yielded strange results. We'd find our traps sprung, but empty. Not stolen or damaged, just opened, as if something had carefully released whatever we'd caught. We'd find tracks leading to the traps, then stopping. Just stopping, in the middle of snow, with no tracks leading away. Wolverine, Pierre suggested when we gathered to discuss it. They're smart enough to steal from traps. But Wolverine tracks are distinctive, and these weren't Wolverine tracks. They weren't any tracks I'd ever seen. They were roughly human-sized, but elongated. The toes were too long, spread too wide, and the stride length suggested something much taller than any man. Could be indigenous hunters playing tricks on us, Samuel offered, trying to scare us off their territory. Why would they bother? Duncan asked. If they wanted us gone, they'd just tell us. The Cree aren't subtle people. We increased our patrols, checked our trap lines more frequently, and kept our rifles loaded. But the strange occurrences continued. Supplies would go missing from our stores. Small amounts, never enough to be critical, but enough to notice. A bag of flour, some dried meat, a jar of sugar. We accused each other at first, tempers flaring in the close confines of the cabin. But it became clear none of us were taking the supplies. They were just disappearing. December brought heavier snows and temperatures that regularly dropped to 30 below zero. The kind of cold that could kill an exposed man in minutes, that made your breath freeze in your lungs, that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. We ventured out only when necessary, moving between the cabin and our trap lines with military efficiency. It was during one of these runs that Thomas saw it for the first time. He'd gone out alone to check the eastern line, against our new rules, but Thomas was stubborn and said he could handle it. He returned 3 hours later, his face pale beneath his frost-rimmed beard, his eyes wide with something I'd never seen in him before. Genuine terror. "There's something out there," he said, his voice shaking as he huddled near the fire. "Something wrong." "What did you see?" Duncan demanded. "I was checking trap number 7 near the big pine stand. I felt like I was being watched. You know that feeling, when the hair on your neck stands up? I turned around and I saw... He stopped, struggling to find words. It was tall, taller than any man, maybe 8 feet, maybe more. It was standing between 2 trees, just watching me. Skeletal thin, like it was starving. The skin was gray, stretched tight over the bones. But the worst part? He looked at each of us in turn. The worst part was its face. It had my face. My exact face, looking back at me. The cabin fell silent. We all looked at Thomas, trying to decide if exposure had gotten to him, if he'd suffered some kind of frost-induced hallucination. "You saw your own face?" Duncan asked carefully. My face. My exact face. Same beard, same scar on my cheek, same eyes. But it was on this thing, this creature that couldn't possibly be human. And it was smiling at me. This wide, terrible smile that showed too many teeth. "Thomas, you've been working too hard," Samuel said gently. "The cold can play tricks." "I know what I saw," Thomas shouted, then seemed to crumble. "I know how it sounds. I know you think I'm mad, but I saw it. And when I ran, I heard it following me. Heard it laughing with my voice, saying my words, things I'd said, conversations I'd had. It was using my voice." Pierre had gone very quiet during Thomas's testimony. Now he spoke, his voice low and serious. "Wendigo," he said. Not you too, Duncan groaned. I'm French-Canadian, born and raised in the territories, Pierre said. My mother was Cree. I grew up with the stories. The Wendigo is real. It's a spirit of the winter, of starvation, of the hunger that makes men do terrible things. It appears as a skeletal giant, always starving, never satisfied. And it can take the face of those it hunts. Wears their appearance like a mask to confuse, to terrify, to isolate. That's indigenous folklore, Duncan said dismissively. We're educated men, Pierre. We don't believe in... Then how do you explain what Thomas saw? Pierre interrupted. How do you explain the missing supplies, the empty traps, the strange tracks, the feeling we've all had that something is watching us? Duncan had no answer for that. We increased our security measures that night. No one went out alone. We barricaded the door with a heavy timber bar. We loaded all the rifles and kept them within reach. We took turns on watch, 2 men at a time, keeping the fire burning bright through the long Arctic night. I took the midnight to 2 a.m. watch with Henrik. We sat by the fire, listening to the wind howl around the cabin, neither of us speaking much. The cold seeped in through every crack despite our best efforts, making the cabin interior barely warmer than a root cellar. It was around 1:30 when we heard it. Footsteps, crunching through the snow outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. Henrik and I looked at each other, then grabbed our rifles. The footsteps continued, around the north wall, past the corner, along the east wall. Whatever was out there was big enough that we could hear its weight, compressing the snow despite the thick log walls between us. Then it stopped at our door. We heard breathing. Heavy, wet breathing that didn't sound quite human. Then in Thomas's voice, Thomas's exact voice, came words that froze our blood. Let me in. It's so cold out here. Please, brothers, let me in. I'm freezing. I looked toward the bunks where Thomas was sleeping. I could see his form under the blankets, could hear his actual breathing. But outside, his voice continued. Please, I can't feel my hands anymore. The cold, it's too much. Just open the door, just for a moment. Please. That's not me, came Thomas's real voice from his bunk, thick with sleep and growing fear. That's not me talking. The voice outside changed. Now it was Duncan's Scottish brogue. Henrik, lad, it's me. I went out for more firewood and the door's stuck. Can't get it open from this side. Let me in before I freeze. But Duncan was in his bunk too, sitting up now, staring at the door with dawning horror. The voice changed again. My voice this time. Henrik, Samuel, whoever's on watch, I think I left my tobacco pouch outside. I'm just out here getting it. Can you open up? Hearing your own voice coming from outside when you're standing inside is a special kind of horror. It's a violation of identity, a theft of self. I felt my hands shaking on my rifle, though whether from cold or fear, I couldn't say. The thing outside cycled through all our voices, one by one, each pleading to be let in, each giving plausible reasons why that particular person might be outside. It knew us, knew our speech patterns, our accents, our habits. It was testing us, trying to find a weakness, trying to trick one of us into opening that door. We didn't open it. We sat in silence as it continued for nearly an hour, trying every voice, every plea, every manipulation. Finally, as 2 a.m. approached, it stopped. We heard those heavy footsteps move away from the door, circling the cabin once more, then heading off into the forest. No one slept the rest of that night. In the morning, we went out as a group to examine the area around the cabin. The tracks were there, those same elongated, too-wide footprints we'd seen at the trap lines. They circled the cabin multiple times, stopped at the door where the snow was packed down from standing, then led off into the forest to the north. We followed them for about 100 yards, then stopped in horror at what we found. Our supply cache. We'd buried it a quarter-mile from the cabin, a backup in case the cabin burned or we needed to relocate. It had been excavated with precision, the frozen ground dug up, the boxes opened. Nothing was missing, but everything had been examined. And in the snow around the cache, written in huge letters formed by dragging a stick or claw through the snow, was a message. I know everything about you. We stood there staring at that message, 6 grown men suddenly feeling very small and very vulnerable in the vast, white wilderness. The implications were clear. The thing stalking us, the Wendigo, if that's what it truly was, had been watching us for weeks. It knew where we stored our supplies. It knew our routines. It knew our voices well enough to imitate them perfectly. And it wanted us to know that it knew. We should leave, Henrik said, breaking the silence. Pack what we can carry and head south. Cut our losses. It's December, Duncan pointed out. 80 miles through deep snow, in temperatures that will kill us in hours if we stop moving. At least a week's travel, probably more. We don't have the supplies for that journey. We can't stay here, Thomas said. Not with that thing out there. We're safer in the cabin than trying to run, Samuel argued. At least here we have shelter, we have food, we have defensible walls. Out there, exposed, we'd be easy prey. We were trapped. Trapped by the same winter that brought the rich furs we'd come for. The cold that made this territory profitable also made it a prison. We could no more leave than we could fly. We fortify, Duncan decided. We turn this cabin into a fortress. We never go out alone, never at night. We bring in enough wood to last a month if we have to. We ration our food, and we wait for spring. It was the only plan that made sense, even though every instinct screamed at us to run. So we spent the next 3 days hauling wood, reinforcing the door, boarding up the windows with split logs that still allowed us to see out, but would prevent anything from getting in. We brought our entire supply cache to the cabin, abandoning the backup location. We inventoried everything we had and calculated we could last until March if we were careful. The Wendigo watched us work. We'd catch glimpses of it at the edge of the tree line, a tall, skeletal figure that would wear different faces each time we looked. Sometimes it was one of us. Sometimes it was people we'd known in town, people who had no business being this far north. Once, horrifyingly, it wore the face of Henrik's wife back in Sweden, a woman none of us had ever seen, but whom Henrik immediately recognized. How does it know? Henrik whispered, tears freezing on his face. How does it know what she looks like? Pierre had an answer, though it was no comfort. The Wendigo reads minds, reads souls. It knows your deepest fears, your strongest desires, your most treasured memories, and it uses them against you. The psychological warfare was worse than any physical attack. If it had just come at us with claws and teeth, we could have fought back. But this constant mimicry, this violation of identity, this demonstration that our very thoughts weren't private, it was breaking us down from the inside. By late December, we were all showing signs of strain. Thomas barely spoke anymore, just sat by the fire cleaning his rifle over and over. Henrik had developed a nervous habit of constantly checking the door bar, making sure it was secure. Samuel had stopped eating properly. said he couldn't keep anything down. Pierre prayed constantly in French, rosary beads clicking through his fingers. Duncan maintained his leadership role, but I could see the fear in his eyes. And me? I'd started having nightmares. Dreams where I was the one outside in the cold, beating on the cabin door, begging to be let in, while something that looked exactly like me sat inside by the fire. I'd wake up unsure which was real. Was I inside or outside? Was I Jonathan Pierce, the trapper? Or was I the thing pretending to be him? The winter solstice came and went, the darkest day of the year, when the sun barely crept above the horizon before sliding back down. We'd made it this far, just 3 more months until spring. Just 3 more months of surviving the cold, the isolation, and the thing that stalked us. We could make it. We had to make it. But the Wendigo was patient. It had all winter, and it was getting bolder. The real horror was about to begin. January arrived with temperatures that dropped to 40 below zero, the kind of cold that makes the trees crack like rifle shots, that turns your breath to ice crystals in the air, that makes metal stick to skin and rips it away when you try to move. We'd sealed ourselves in the cabin as much as possible, only going out for the most necessary tasks, retrieving firewood from the pile we'd stacked against the cabin wall, checking that the chimney wasn't blocked by snow, dealing with necessary sanitary matters. The Wendigo's tactics changed. It no longer approached the cabin only at night. Now it came during the day, in the pale Arctic light that lasted only a few hours. We'd see it standing at the edge of the clearing, wearing different faces, watching us. Sometimes it would stand there for hours without moving, a silent sentinel that made us feel like prisoners rather than shelters. It was Pierre who first suggested what the creature was doing. "It's waiting for us to starve," he said, as we sat around the fire one evening. "Or to go mad, or both. It doesn't need to attack us. Time is on its side. Every day we stay in here, our supplies get lower. Every day of isolation, our minds get weaker. It's a siege, and we're already losing." "We're not losing," Duncan insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have enough supplies. We're strong enough to last." But Pierre was right. The Wendigo didn't need to breach our walls. It just needed to wait while we consumed our resources and our sanity. And it was winning. The food situation was becoming critical faster than we'd anticipated. Our calculations had been based on 6 healthy men doing moderate work. But the stress, the cold, and the constant fear were burning through our calories at an accelerated rate. We were all losing weight, our faces becoming gaunt, our movements slower. We'd already cut our rations twice, but it wasn't enough. "We need to get more supplies," Samuel said in early January. "We have traps out there with animals in them. We have our cache locations. We're sitting in here starving, while food is literally waiting for us outside." "It's suicide to go out there," Thomas countered. "That thing is waiting for exactly that, for us to get desperate enough to expose ourselves." "We're going to die in here if we don't get more food," Samuel shot back. "At least out there we have a chance to fight, to run, to do something other than sit and waste away." The argument went back and forth for hours. Finally, Duncan made a decision. "Tomorrow, at first light, we'll send out a team of 4. 2 to check the nearest trap line, 2 to provide cover. We stay within sight of the cabin. We move fast and we move together. We get what we can, and we get back. Agreed? It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only plan we had. That night, no one slept well. We all knew that going outside was exactly what the Wendigo wanted, but staying inside meant certain starvation. We were damned either way. Morning came with a peculiar phenomenon we'd never seen before. The sky was perfectly clear, the sun just beginning to rise, but the air was filled with ice crystals that caught the light and created pillars of color stretching from earth to sky. It was beautiful and terrifying, like the world itself was warning us not to venture out. Duncan, Pierre, Henrik, and I prepared to go, while Thomas and Samuel stayed behind to watch from the cabin windows with loaded rifles. We dressed in layers, wrapped our faces against the cold, and checked our weapons one final time. "If we're not back in 2 hours," Duncan told Thomas, "don't come looking for us. Just bar the door and survive." Thomas nodded grimly. We all knew what that meant. If we didn't come back, we were dead, and the remaining 2 men would face the rest of winter alone. We stepped outside into the bitter cold. The morning air burned my lungs with each breath. The snow crunched under our boots with that peculiar squeak that only comes at extremely low temperatures. We moved in a tight group, 4 men with rifles ready, scanning the tree line for any sign of the Wendigo. The nearest trap line was only 300 yards from the cabin, but it felt like 3 miles. Every step was an agony of anticipation, waiting for the thing to appear, to attack, to do whatever it had been planning all these weeks. We reached the first trap. Empty. The second trap. Empty. The third trap. There was a lynx in it, frozen solid. But when we got close, we could see that something had already eaten most of the meat, leaving only the pelt and bones. The fourth trap held a wolverine, also mostly consumed. "It's been raiding our traps," Pierre said, his voice muffled through his face wrapping. "Taking what we catch before we can get to it." We moved to the 5th trap, and that's when we saw it. The Wendigo stood between us and the trap. 8 feet tall, impossibly thin. Its gray skin stretched so tight over its bones that every rib visible. But the worst part, it was wearing Duncan's face. The exact same face of the man standing right next to me. And it was smiling. "Run," Duncan said quietly. "Back to the cabin. Now." We turned and ran. Behind us, we heard the creature's voice, Duncan's voice, calling out, "Where are you going? The trap line isn't finished. We haven't checked them all yet. Come back. We need to finish the job." I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The Wendigo was following us, but not running. It was walking with long, loping strides that covered ground faster than our desperate run. And as it walked, its face changed. First Duncan, then Pierre, then Henrik, then me. It cycled through all our faces like shuffling cards, grinning with each one. We burst through the cabin door, and Thomas and Samuel immediately slammed it shut behind us, dropping the bar into place. We could hear the Wendigo approach, could hear its footsteps on the wooden porch Duncan had built in November. Then came a sound that made my blood freeze. Knocking. Polite, civilized knocking, like a neighbor come to call. "Excuse me," came a woman's voice, sweet and cultured with a British accent. "I seem to be lost. My husband and I were traveling north when our sled broke. He went for help, but that was 3 days ago. I'm so cold. Please, might I come in just to warm myself?" We all stood frozen, staring at the door. There was no woman. There had been no travelers. We were 80 miles from the nearest settlement. This was the Wendigo, trying a new tactic. The knocking came again. "Please, I can pay. I have money, food, whatever you need. I just need to get warm. My fingers, I can't feel them anymore." "Don't answer it," Pierre whispered. "Don't acknowledge it at all." But Henrik was moving toward the door, his face blank, his hand reaching for the bar. "Henrik, no!" I grabbed his arm, pulled him back. He looked at me with confused eyes. "But she needs help. We can't just leave her out there. She'll die." "There's no woman," I said firmly. "It's the Wendigo. You know this." "But I can hear her. She sounds so frightened, so cold." Henrik's eyes were glazing over, like he was being hypnotized. "We have to help her." Duncan slapped Henrik hard across the face. The sharp sound of it snapped Henrik out of whatever trance he'd been in. He blinked, looked around, then seemed to realize what he'd been about to do. "I'm sorry," he said shakily. "I don't know what—" I could hear her so clearly. I believed her. "That's what it does," Pierre said. "It gets in your mind, makes you believe, makes you want to help. And the moment you open that door, it has you." The knocking stopped. The woman's voice called out one more time. "Please, I have a daughter. She's only 7. She needs her mother. Please don't let me die out here." Then silence. We waited, holding our breath, rifles pointed at the door. 1 minute passed. 5 minutes. 10. Had it left? Had it given up this particular attack? Then came a new sound. Scratching. Something was scratching at the cabin walls, moving around the perimeter. Slow, deliberate scratching, like it was testing the strength of the logs, looking for weak points. The scratching continued for hours. It would stop for a few minutes, then start up again at a different location. The north wall, the east wall, near the chimney, at the door. It was methodical, patient, thorough, mapping our defenses, finding our vulnerabilities. As the sun began to set, barely 3 hours after it had risen, the scratching finally stopped. We heard the heavy footsteps move away from the cabin, heading back into the forest. But we knew it hadn't gone far. It was out there, waiting, planning its next move. That night, we held a council. Our food situation was desperate. The trip to the trap lines had yielded nothing, and proved that the Wendigo was systematically destroying our ability to feed ourselves. We had maybe 2 weeks of supplies left at our current rations, and we were already weak from hunger. "We have to try the backup cache," Samuel said. "The one we buried before we even built the cabin. It's 3 miles from here, but the Wendigo might not know about it. We buried it before the creature started stalking us." 3 miles in this cold? In this snow? With that thing hunting us? Thomas shook his head. "We'd never make it." "We're dead if we stay here anyway," Samuel argued. "At least this way we're doing something, not just sitting and waiting to starve." "There might be another option," Pierre said quietly. We all looked at him. In the old stories, there are ways to fight a Wendigo, to kill it, or at least drive it away. "How?" Duncan demanded. "Fire. The Wendigo is a spirit of winter and cold. Fire is its opposite. A large enough fire, a hot enough fire, might be able to destroy it, or at least hurt it enough that it leaves us alone. We'd need a lot of wood for that," I said. "More than we have stockpiled." "There's dead wood in the forest," Pierre countered. Fallen trees, dry branches. We could gather it. While being hunted by the thing we're trying to kill? Henrik asked. That seems like suicide. Everything is suicide at this point, Samuel said bitterly. At least this way we'd be fighting back. We argued through the night, going over our limited options. Stay and starve. Try for the distant cache. Attempt to gather enough wood to create a fire trap for the Wendigo. None of the options were good, but doing nothing was guaranteed death. Finally, as dawn approached, Duncan made a decision. We'll try for the cache. Tomorrow. All 6 of us. We leave nothing behind that we can't carry. If we can't get back here, we keep moving south. We try for the settlement. That's 80 miles, Thomas said. Through Arctic wilderness. In our condition. Do you have a better idea? Duncan asked. No one did. We spent the day preparing. We packed everything we could carry: food, ammunition, blankets, fire-starting materials. We fashioned crude sleds from boards to drag our supplies. We said goodbye to the cabin that had been our shelter, knowing we'd likely never see it again. That night, our last night in the cabin, the Wendigo's psychological assault reached a new level of cruelty. It started with singing. A woman's voice, singing a lullaby in Swedish. Henrik gasped and went pale. "That's my wife," he whispered. "That's the song she sings to our daughter. How does it know that song?" The singing continued, and then a child's voice joined in. A little girl, singing in Swedish, calling out, "Papa? Papa, where are you? I'm scared. It's dark. Papa, please come find me." Henrik broke. He ran to the door, sobbing, trying to lift the bar. "She's out there. My daughter is out there. I have to." We grabbed him, pulled him back, held him as he fought and screamed. The child's voice outside grew more desperate. "Papa, why won't you help me? Don't you love me anymore? Papa?" It was torture to listen to. Torture to watch Henrik's anguish. Torture to know that the thing outside was pulling these images and voices from Henrik's mind and using them as weapons. The voices changed. Now it was my mother's voice, dead for 5 years, calling my name. Then Thomas's brother, who died in a mining accident. Then Samuel's father. Then Duncan's fiancée, who died of influenza before they could marry. One by one, the Wendigo dragged out our deepest losses, our most painful memories, and weaponized them against us. We huddled together in the cabin, 6 grown men reduced to sobbing wrecks, holding each other, trying to block out the voices of our dead loved ones, begging us to open the door. It lasted until dawn. When the sun finally rose, the voices stopped. We were exhausted, emotionally shattered, but alive. And today was the day we would either escape or die trying. We gathered our supplies, checked our weapons one final time, and opened the door. The Wendigo was waiting for us. It stood in the center of the clearing, wearing no face at all now. Its features were smooth, blank, like unfinished clay. As we watched, frozen in the doorway, it began to shape a face. My face. And it smiled. "Going somewhere, Jonathan?" it said in my voice. "The forest is dangerous in winter. You should stay inside where it's safe." We raised our rifles and fired as one. 6 shot at close range, all hitting center mass. The creature staggered back, and we could see the bullets it struck. We could see the dark ichor leaking from the wounds. But it didn't fall.
It didn't even seem particularly bothered. It looked down at its chest, at the bullet holes, then back up at us. And it laughed. My laugh, coming from my face, but with a mocking cruelty I'd never possessed. "Run," Duncan said. "Run!" We ran. 6 men dragging sleds loaded with supplies, running through deep snow in 40 below temperatures, with a face-changing monster stalking behind
us. We ran for our lives, and we knew that some of us wouldn't make it. The hunt had begun, and the Wendigo was no longer content to wait. We ran for 3 hours straight before our bodies simply couldn't continue. The temperature was dropping as the weak winter sun climbed to its pathetic zenith, barely casting light through the gray sky. We'd covered perhaps 5 miles, a pitiful distance under normal circumstances, but through waist-deep snow while dragging sleds, it was nearly superhuman effort. We collapsed in a small clearing surrounded by black spruce trees, gasping for breath, our lungs burning from the frozen air. Steam rose from our bodies despite the cold, sweat freezing on our faces even as we generated it. We were burning through energy we couldn't afford to lose, energy our starving bodies didn't have to spare. "We can't keep this pace," Henrik gasped between breaths. "We'll die of exhaustion before we freeze." Duncan nodded, too winded to speak. We all knew we couldn't sustain this flight, but we also knew that stopping meant giving the Wendigo time to catch up. We were trapped in an impossible equation: run and burn out, or rest and be caught. "Where is it?" Samuel asked, scanning the trees around us. "I don't see it. Anyone see it?" We all looked, rifles ready, turning in slow circles. The forest was empty. No sign of the creature. No movement at all except the gentle sway of snow-laden branches in the wind. "Maybe it gave up," Thomas suggested, though his tone made clear he didn't believe it. "It doesn't give up," Pierre said flatly. "It's hunting. This is what it does, what it's always done. We're just the latest prey." "Then where is it?" I asked. As if in answer, we heard a sound from the direction we'd come. A voice. My voice. "We're going the wrong way. The cache is east, not south. We need to turn around." It was coming from perhaps 100 yards back along our trail. We all stared at each other, then at me, confirming I hadn't spoken. "It's trying to confuse us," Duncan said. "Make us doubt our direction. Everyone stays together. We know where we're going." We gathered our sleds and started moving again, slower now, conserving what energy we had left. Behind us, the voice continued calling out. My voice, then Henrik's, then Samuel's, each giving contradictory directions, each sounding perfectly natural and reasonable. "The cache is west, not south. We passed it already. We need to go back. I remember now, it's near the creek bed. We need to head north." It was psychological warfare at its finest. The Wendigo knew that if it could make us question our direction, make us argue amongst ourselves, it could scatter us. And scattered, we'd be easy prey. "Everyone remember the landmarks," Duncan ordered. "The cache is near the double-trunk birch, by the frozen stream. We buried it 30 paces from the tree, bearing southeast. That hasn't changed." We pressed on, trying to ignore the voices, but they were getting closer. The Wendigo was pacing us, staying just out of sight in the trees, calling out in our voices, trying to break our cohesion. It was around noon, though the sun gave little indication of time in this perpetual twilight, when Henrik suddenly stopped. "Wait," he said. "Listen." We all froze. At first, I heard nothing but the wind and our own breathing. Then, faintly, I heard it. Crying. A child crying. "That's my daughter," Henrik whispered. "That's Emma. She's crying for me." "Henrik, no," I said, grabbing his arm. "It's not real. You know this." "She sounds so close, so scared." Henrik's eyes were unfocused, distant. "I can't leave her out here. I can't." He jerked away from me and started running toward the sound, abandoning his sled, abandoning his rifle, abandoning everything in his desperate need to reach his daughter, who was thousands of miles away in Sweden. "Henrik!" Duncan shouted. "Stop!" But Henrik was beyond hearing us. He crashed through the undergrowth, following the crying that only he seemed to hear clearly. We started to follow, but Pierre grabbed Duncan's arm. "It's too late," Pierre said. "He's lost. If we follow, we'll be separated, and then it will take us all, one by one. That's what it wants." "We can't just abandon him," Thomas protested. "He abandoned us," Pierre said coldly. "The moment he listened to the Wendigo, he was already gone." We stood there, torn between loyalty to our companion and survival instinct. The decision was made for us when Henrik's screaming started. Not the cry of sudden attack, but prolonged, agonized screaming that went on and on, echoing through the forest. Screaming that slowly changed in pitch and tone until it didn't sound quite human anymore. Then it stopped. The forest fell silent except for the wind. We waited, rifles raised, watching the direction Henrik had run. Minutes passed. Then we heard footsteps approaching. Someone was coming back. Henrik emerged from the trees. He looked normal, same clothes, same face, same beard. But something was wrong. His movements were too smooth, too fluid. His eyes didn't blink. And when he smiled, it was too wide. "Found her," Henrik said in his own voice. "She was right there, just like I thought." He paused. "Why are you all pointing guns at me?" "That's not Henrik," Pierre said quietly. "Of course it's me," Henrik replied, looking confused. "Who else would I be? Come on, we're wasting time. We need to keep moving." "What's your wife's name?" Duncan demanded. "Astrid," Henrik answered without hesitation. "And my daughter is Emma. She's 7 years old. Her favorite color is blue. She loves ice skating. I promised to teach her to ski when I bring them over from Sweden." He rattled off the details perfectly, information only Henrik would know. "Now can we please move? We're burning daylight." We stood in a standoff. The thing wearing Henrik's face and Henrik's memories looked at us with growing frustration. "Fine," it finally said. "If you're going to be this way." And then its face began to melt, the features running like wax, reforming into Thomas's face. "Is this better?" it asked in Thomas's voice. Then it changed again, becoming Samuel, then Duncan, then me, cycling through all of us like flipping through a book. "Which one makes you comfortable?" it asked, its voice a layered chorus of all our voices speaking simultaneously. "Which face would you like me to wear? I can be anyone. Everyone. All of you at once. "Run," Duncan said. "Now." We grabbed our sleds and ran, leaving the thing behind us as it called out in Henrik's voice. "Wait! Don't leave me! I'm still Henrik! I'm still your friend!" But we knew better. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't Henrik anymore. The real Henrik was dead, taken by the Wendigo. And now the creature had his face, his voice, his memories to add to its collection. We were down to 5. The afternoon brought a development we hadn't anticipated. A storm. Dark clouds rolled in from the north, and within minutes, snow was falling so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, driving the snow horizontal. "We need shelter," Duncan shouted over the wind. "We'll die of exposure if we keep moving." We found a natural overhang of rock that provided minimal protection from the wind and quickly set up a temporary camp. We couldn't risk a fire. The storm would extinguish it anyway. So we huddled together under our blankets, sharing body heat, watching the storm rage around us. "This is how it wins," Samuel said bitterly. "It doesn't need to kill us. The winter will do it. The cold, the snow, the hunger. We're already dead. We just don't know it yet." "We're not dead until we're dead," Duncan insisted. But even his legendary determination was faltering. We could all see it in his face, the realization that we'd made a fatal error in judgment. We should have left in November, should have listened to the Cree warnings, should never have stayed once we realized something was wrong. Should have, could have, would have. The words of the dying. The storm lasted through the afternoon and into the night. We took turns keeping watch, though what we were watching for in the blinding snow, none of us could say. The Wendigo could be 5 feet away, and we wouldn't see it until it was too late. It was during Samuel's watch, around midnight, that he woke us with an urgent whisper. "Someone's out there." We all jolted awake, grabbing our rifles. Through the driving snow, we could see a figure approaching our shelter. It was moving slowly, hunched over, clearly struggling against the storm. As it got closer, we could make out details. It was a man, dressed in furs like ours, face wrapped against the cold. He looked exhausted, desperate. He called out in French, his words barely audible over the wind. "Pierre," I said. "What's he saying?" Pierre's face had gone pale. He's saying he's Pierre Duchamp. He's saying he's me." We all looked at the real Pierre, sitting right there among us, then back at the figure approaching through the storm. It was close enough now that we could see its face, or rather, Pierre's face, looking back at us with desperation and hope. "Please," the figure called out in French. "I got separated from my friends. I've been wandering in this storm for hours. I can see your shelter. Please let me join you." "Shoot it," Pierre said flatly. "But what if—" Thomas started. "It's not me," Pierre shouted. "I'm right here. That thing out there is using my face. Shoot it." Duncan raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide in the wind, disappearing into the storm. The figure, the false Pierre, spots walking. It stood there in the snow, staring at us, and slowly its expression changed from desperation to amusement. "Almost worked," it said in perfect French, in Pierre's exact voice. Then its face began to shift and change, becoming Henrik, then becoming something else, something we'd never seen before. An emaciated face with sunken eyes and too wide mouth. Gray skin stretched over prominent skull bones. The true face of the Wendigo. "You're learning," it said, its voice now a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Getting harder to trick you. That's good. Makes it more interesting. More satisfying when I finally catch you." It smiled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, then turned and vanished into the storm. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We sat huddled together, rifles ready, watching the storm, waiting for the next attack. It didn't come. The Wendigo seemed content to have planted more seeds of paranoia, more doubt. Because now we had a new problem. How could we trust that each of us was really who we appeared to be? The Wendigo had worn Henrik's face with perfect accuracy, had known all his memories and details. How could we be certain it hadn't already replaced one of us? Two of us? How could we know that the person sitting next to us was really our companion, and not the creature in disguise? The storm cleared by dawn, but the damage was done. We looked at each other with suspicion now, each of us wondering, doubting. The Wendigo had found a new way to destroy us, not from outside, but from within, turning us against each other through paranoia. "We need a system," Duncan said as we broke camp. "Questions that only the real person would know the answers to. Details we've never spoken aloud, that the creature couldn't have overheard." "It reads minds," Pierre pointed out. "How do we ask questions it can't answer if it can pull the answers directly from our thoughts?" It was a valid point, and we had no counter for it. We were fighting an enemy that knew everything we knew, that could become anyone we'd ever known, that was patient enough to wait for us to destroy ourselves. We'd covered perhaps another 2 miles when Samuel collapsed. He just fell, face first into the snow, his sled trailing behind him, and didn't get up. We rushed to him, rolled him over, and were horrified at what we saw. Samuel had lost at least 30 pounds since we'd left the cabin. His face was skeletal, his eyes sunken deep in their sockets, his skin gray. He'd been hiding how badly the starvation was affecting him, and now his body had simply given out. "Leave me," he whispered. "I'm slowing you down. I can't make it anyway." "We're not leaving anyone else," Duncan said firmly. "We'll carry you." "You can't carry me and the supplies," Samuel pointed out. "And without the supplies, you'll die anyway. I'm already dead. Don't let me take you with me." He was right, and we all knew it. Carrying Samuel would mean abandoning supplies we desperately needed. It would slow us down to a crawl. And Samuel was dying anyway. Starvation had progressed too far, even if we'd had abundant food, which we didn't. "I'll stay with him," Thomas said quietly. "Keep him company. You 3 go on. Get to the cache. Get to safety. Tell our story." "Thomas," Duncan started. "It's the only way," Thomas interrupted. 3 of you have a chance. 5 of us will just die together. Go, before I change my mind." We left them there, Thomas and Samuel sitting together in the snow, sharing what little remained of our whiskey, waiting for the cold or the Wendigo to claim them. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, walking away from friends who'd stood by us through everything, leaving them to die alone in the frozen waste. We were down to 3, Duncan, Pierre, and myself. That afternoon, we heard the screaming start behind us. Not humans screaming, something else. Something that started with Samuel's voice, then Thomas's voice, then became a sound no human throat could make. It went on for 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The Wendigo had found them, and now it would come for us. We pushed on through the evening, driven by desperation now rather than hope. The cache was still miles away. The settlement was a fantasy. We were walking corpses, kept mobile by nothing but momentum and fear. As darkness fell, we stopped in a stand of trees that offered minimal shelter. We'd abandoned our sleds hours ago, kept only what we could carry on our backs. Food, ammunition, 1 blanket each. Everything else was gone, sacrificed to speed. "We're not going to make it," I said as we sat huddled together. "Even if we reach the cache, even if there's food there, we can't make it another 80 miles to the settlement. Not in our condition." "Then we die trying," Duncan said. "Better than sitting and waiting for it." "There might be another way," Pierre said. Both Duncan and I looked at him. "The old stories. The Wendigo can be killed, but not with bullets, not with blades, only with fire. A fire hot enough to melt ice, to burn bone, to destroy the spirit itself. We don't have the means to create that kind of fire," I pointed out. "We barely have kindling." "But the Wendigo doesn't know that," Pierre said. "Maybe we can bluff it, make it think we're more dangerous than we are. Force it to back off long enough for us to reach safety. Or we could just anger it and make it kill us faster," Duncan countered. "Do you have a better plan?" Pierre asked. Duncan didn't. We built a fire, a real one, the first we'd dared since leaving the cabin. We made it as large as we could with our limited wood, and we sat around it, feeding it constantly, keeping the flames high. And we waited for the Wendigo to come. It didn't take long. We heard its approach through the trees, those distinctive heavy footsteps that announced its presence. It stopped at the edge of our firelight, and we could see it clearly for the first time in days. The Wendigo stood there in its true form, no longer bothering with stolen faces. 8 feet of skeletal horror, gray skin stretched over bones, arms too long ending in clawed hands, legs bent backward at the knee like a deer's. Its face was a nightmare of angles and hollows, mouth too wide, filled with those needle teeth. And its eyes, God, its eyes, were completely black, reflecting nothing, absorbing light like voids. But there was something else in those eyes now, something I hadn't seen before. Hesitation, caution, perhaps even fear? Pierre saw it too. He stood up, grabbed a burning branch from our fire, and held it toward the creature like a weapon. "You want us?" he shouted in French, then English. "Come and get us, but you'll burn. Fire will destroy you. That's what the old stories say. Fire is death to your kind." The Wendigo took a step back, actually stepped back from the flames. Pierre was right. It feared fire. Maybe couldn't be killed by it as the legends claimed, but it definitely feared it. "We're going to burn you," Pierre continued, his voice gaining strength. "We're going to track you back to your lair, and we're going to burn the whole forest down if we have to. You picked the wrong men to hunt." It was a magnificent bluff, and for a moment I thought it might actually work. The Wendigo continued to back away, its black eyes fixed on the flames, and I dared to hope that we'd found its weakness, its vulnerability. Then it spoke. In Henrik's voice. "You can't burn me. You can barely keep yourselves warm." In Samuel's voice. "You're starving, dying. You have no strength for hunting me." In Thomas's voice. I've already won. I've eaten your friends, taken their faces. Their memories are mine now, and soon yours will be too." Then, horribly, in all three voices simultaneously, "The fire will die, the cold will remain, and I am the cold, I am the hunger, I am winter eternal, and you are just meat." The flames of our fire suddenly dimmed, as if the Wendigo's words had physical weight that could smother heat. We fed more wood to it desperately, but the wood seemed reluctant to catch, burning weakly, producing more smoke than light. The temperature dropped, not gradually but suddenly, drastically. Our breath froze in our lungs. Ice crystals formed on our eyebrows and beards. The moisture in the air crystallized and fell like glittering snow. The Wendigo was pulling the heat from the world around us, feeding on it, growing stronger as we grew weaker. "We need to run," I said through chattering teeth. "Now, while we still can." We grabbed what we could and ran. Behind us, we heard the Wendigo's laughter, the laughter of our dead friends, echoing through the frozen forest. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, until our legs gave out and we collapsed in the snow. And there, lying in the snow before us, like a gift from God or a final cruel joke from the Wendigo, was a marker, a cairn of stones that we recognized. We'd found the cache. Against all odds, through everything, we'd made it. Duncan and I started digging frantically, our frozen fingers scraping at the earth. Pierre stood watch, rifle ready, scanning the trees. We dug down 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. The cache was empty. Every box, every container, every supply we'd carefully buried months ago, all empty. The lids were carefully replaced, the cache perfectly preserved, but completely devoid of contents. Someone, something, had found it before us, had emptied it, had left it here as a trap, as false hope to break us. The Wendigo had known, had always known, had probably watched us bury it in the first place, had waited until this moment, until we'd sacrificed everything to reach it, to let us discover it was all for nothing. We sat there in the snow, staring at the empty cache, and something broke inside all three of us. We'd lost. The Wendigo had won. There was no food, no hope, no possibility of survival. We were 80 miles from safety with no supplies, in temperatures that would kill us in hours, stalked by a creature that had proven completely immune to our weapons and our tricks. We were dead. We just hadn't stopped moving yet. "I'm sorry," Duncan said, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry I brought you all here. I'm sorry I didn't listen to the warnings. I'm sorry I got you all killed." "It's not your fault," I said, though we all knew it was. We'd all known it was a mistake, and we'd all chosen money over safety. We'd all ignored the warnings. We were all responsible. As darkness fell on what would certainly be our last night alive, we heard it approaching again. The heavy footsteps. The creature that had hunted us across miles of frozen waste. The thing that had taken our friends, worn their faces, stolen their memories. It stepped into the clearing where we sat, and this time it wore all our lost companions at once. Henrik's face, Samuel's clothes, Thomas's posture. A composite horror, a mockery of friendship and camaraderie. "Finally," it said in all their voices. "Finally you understand. There was never any hope, never any escape. This forest is mine, winter is mine, and everything that enters my domain becomes mine eventually." It walked toward us slowly, savoring our defeat, our despair. We didn't even raise our rifles. What was the point? Bullets didn't stop it. Fire didn't kill it. Running just delayed the inevitable. The Wendigo reached down toward Duncan's face with one clawed hand, and I closed my eyes, not wanting to see what came next. Then I heard a sound I never expected to hear in this frozen hell. Human voices. Many human voices, calling out in Cree. I opened my eyes to see lights approaching through the trees. Torches, at least a dozen of them, carried by indigenous hunters. At their head was the elder, Makwa, the one who'd warned us months ago. The Wendigo turned toward them, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in its movements. It backed away from us, away from the approaching lights and voices. The hunters began to chant, a rhythmic incantation in Cree, and the Wendigo actually recoiled from the sound. "You cannot have these men," Makwa called out in English. "They are under our protection now. Leave this place, winter spirit. Your hunt is ended." The Wendigo screamed, a sound that combined all our dead friends' voices into one horrific wail of frustration and rage. Then it turned and fled into the darkness, its footsteps receding into the forest, until we could hear them no more. Makwa and his hunters approached us. "We felt when it began hunting you," the elder said. "Felt its hunger growing. We came as fast as we could. Almost too late." "Why?" Duncan asked. "Why save us after we ignored your warnings?" Makwa smiled sadly. "Because you are human, and humans make mistakes. And because the Wendigo must not be allowed to feed unchecked. It grows stronger with each person it takes. If we let it have you, it might grow strong enough that not even we could stop it." They gave us food, warm clothes, and began the journey back to their village. As we walked, I looked back once toward the forest, where we'd nearly died. At the edge of the trees, barely visible in the darkness, I saw it. The Wendigo, standing there, watching. And it was wearing my face. The Cree village was called Pimichikamak, and it sat on the shores of a lake that was frozen solid when we arrived. We were carried more than we walked those final miles, our bodies having given everything they had just to survive. The villagers took us in without hesitation, feeding us carefully. Our stomachs had shrunk too much to handle normal portions, and treating our frostbite and exposure injuries. I lost 3 toes from my left foot and 2 fingers on my right hand to frostbite. Duncan lost part of his nose and most of one ear. Pierre came through relatively intact physically, though his eyes had taken on a haunted quality that never quite left. We spent 2 months in that village, recovering our strength. waiting for the worst of winter to pass, so we could make the journey back to civilization. The Cree treated us with a mixture of pity and wariness. We were survivors of a Wendigo hunt, which made us both lucky, marked. Several of the younger hunters asked to hear our story, wanted to know what we'd experienced, how we'd survived. The elders mostly stayed away, as if our proximity to the creature had tainted us somehow. It was Makwa who finally explained it to me one evening as we sat by the communal fire. "You understand now why we warned you," he said, not unkindly. "The Wendigo is not like other dangers of the forest. It is not a bear that can be avoided, or a wolf that can be scared off. It is a spirit, an embodiment of the hunger that drives men to do terrible things. And once it has hunted you, once it has tasted your fear and fed on your suffering, it never fully lets go." "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "You will see it again," Makwa said quietly. "Maybe not for years, maybe not until you are old, but you will see it. In mirrors, in crowds, in the faces of strangers. The Wendigo marks those who escape it, and it never truly stops hunting." I wanted to dismiss his words as more folklore, more superstition. But I'd seen too much, experienced too much, to pretend I didn't believe. The Wendigo was real. And if it was real, then so were the consequences of having been hunted by it. Duncan took the news differently. "Good," he said when Makwa told us all. "Let it come. I've got some unfinished business with that creature. Lost 3 good men to it. Lost part of myself. If it comes back, I'll be ready this time." But Pierre understood. Pierre, whose mother had been Cree, whose blood carried the old knowledge, knew exactly what Makwa was telling us. "We're cursed," he said simply. "Marked by the winter spirit. We survived, but we didn't escape." March came, and with it the slow breaking of winter's grip. The days grew longer, the temperatures climbed above freezing during daylight hours, and the ice on the lakes began to show signs of thaw. It was time to leave, to return to the world we'd left behind. The Cree gave us supplies for the journey, and an escort of 3 hunters who knew the safest routes south. We said our goodbyes to Makwa and the others who'd saved our lives. "Remember," Makwa said as we prepared to depart, "the Wendigo feeds on isolation, on despair, on the darkness in men's hearts. Stay in the light. Stay among people. And if you feel its presence again, do not face it alone." We promised we wouldn't. But promises made in March feel different than promises that must be kept in December. The journey south took 2 weeks. We saw no sign of the Wendigo, though every night I felt like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. Every sound in the darkness made me reach for a weapon I no longer carried. We reached Winnipeg in late March of 1904, 3 men returning from a 6-man expedition. The first question from the authorities was obvious. Where were the others? We told our story. We told it exactly as it happened, leaving out no details, hiding nothing. We spoke of the Wendigo, of its face-changing abilities, of how it had hunted us through the winter, of Henrik and Samuel and Thomas dying in that frozen waste. They didn't believe us. "Hypothermia can cause hallucinations," the investigating officer said, his tone sympathetic but dismissive. "Starvation affects the mind. You gentlemen went through a terrible ordeal, and your minds protected you by creating a narrative that explained your suffering." "It wasn't a hallucination," Duncan insisted. "All 3 of us saw it. The Cree hunters saw it. It was real." "The indigenous peoples have their own cultural beliefs," the officer said carefully. Beliefs that you, in your compromised state, may have adopted. But there's no evidence of any creature. What we have evidence of is 3 men dying of exposure during an unusually harsh winter in a remote location. It's tragic, but it's not supernatural. The official report listed Henrik Larsson, Samuel Oakes, and Thomas Brennan as missing, presumed dead due to exposure and starvation during winter trapping expedition. There was a note about possible mental distress due to extreme conditions regarding the survivors' claims of a creature. The case was closed. We tried to tell others, tried to warn people about what was out there in the Northern Territories. But every telling made us sound more insane, more traumatized, more unreliable. Eventually, we stopped trying. Let people think we'd gone mad from the cold. Let them dismiss us as broken men with broken minds. It was easier than fighting to make them believe in monsters. Duncan returned to Scotland that summer. Said he couldn't stand being in Canada anymore. Couldn't stand the thought of that creature still out there in the territories he'd once worked. I received one letter from him, posted from Glasgow, saying he'd settled down and was trying to rebuild his life. The second letter came 3 years later from his sister. Duncan had died, frozen to death in his own home during a mild winter, found sitting in his chair by the fire with a look of terror on his face. The fire had been blazing when they found him, the house warm, but Duncan had frozen solid anyway. The doctors couldn't explain it. I could, but I didn't tell Duncan's sister what I knew. The Wendigo had found him. Even thousands of miles away, even in civilization, even surrounded by people and warmth and light. It had found him and finished what it started. Pierre lasted longer. He moved to Montreal, got married, tried to build a normal life. We corresponded occasionally, careful letters that never mentioned the winter of 1904, that spoke only of weather and work and mundane things. But I could read between the lines. Pierre was struggling, seeing things, hearing things. The mark was on him too, and it was eating away at his sanity. His last letter came in 1911, 7 years after our ordeal. It was barely coherent, rambling about faces in crowds, about hearing voices calling his name, about feeling watched every moment. "It's still hunting me," he wrote. "It never stopped. It's just been waiting, patient, letting me think I was safe. But I'm not safe. None of us are. It's coming for me, Jonathan. I can feel it getting closer every day." Pierre died that winter, found in an alley in Montreal, frozen to death on a night when the temperature had barely dipped below freezing. Like Duncan, he died of impossible cold, frozen solid, while the world around him remained above freezing. The police ruled it an accident, possibly alcohol-related. They didn't see the pattern I saw. 3 survivors of the Wendigo, 2 dead within a decade. And me? I'm still here, still alive, still waiting for my turn. I'm writing this in December of 1924, exactly 20 years after our encounter. I'm 49 years old now. I never married, never had children, never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. Because Makwa was right. The Wendigo never fully let go. I see it sometimes. Not often, not every day, but enough to know it's still there, still watching, still waiting. I'll be walking down a busy street in Toronto or Ottawa, or wherever I've fled to this time, and I'll see someone in the crowd with Henrik's face, or Samuel's face, or Thomas's face. They'll look right at me, smile that too wide smile, and then disappear into the crowd before I can get close. I've tried going south, tried putting as much distance as possible between myself and the Northern Territories. I've lived in New York, in Chicago, in St. Louis. But geography doesn't matter. The Wendigo isn't bound by location. It's a spirit, and spirits go where they will. I've tried surrounding myself with people, with noise, with light, all the things Makwa said would help. But the isolation isn't physical. You can be alone in a crowd. You can feel the darkness pressing in even under electric lights. The Wendigo knows this. It feeds on it. Winters are the worst. Every December, as the snow begins to fall and the temperatures drop, I feel it getting closer. Feel its attention turning toward me like a searchlight. I've learned to recognize the signs, the two quiet moments, the feeling of being watched, the slight drop in temperature that has nothing to do with weather. It's playing with me. I understand that now. It could have taken me in 1904, could have killed me alongside the others, but it let me escape. Let all three of us escape. Because the hunt is more satisfying when the prey thinks it has a chance. Because the fear is sweeter when it's mixed with hope. Duncan hoped he could outrun it by fleeing to Scotland. The Wendigo let him hope for 3 years before proving him wrong. Pierre hoped he could hide in civilization, among crowds and electric lights and the trappings of modern life. The Wendigo let him hope for 7 years. And me? I've had 20 years of hope. 20 years of thinking maybe, just maybe, I would be the exception. 20 years of looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, feeling my heart race every time I see a familiar face in an unexpected place. But I know my time is running out. I can feel it in my bones, in the way winter seems colder each year, in the way the darkness seems to press closer. The Wendigo is patient, but it doesn't forget, and it always collects what it's owed. Last winter, the encounters intensified. I saw it 3 times in 1 week. Once, standing outside my boarding house window at 2 a.m., wearing my face, staring in at me. Once, sitting across from me on a streetcar, wearing Thomas's face, smiling as other passengers moved past it without seeming to notice. Once, reflected in a shop window, standing behind me when I knew nothing was there. It's getting bolder. Or maybe I'm getting weaker. Maybe after 20 years of fear, my defenses are finally crumbling. Maybe it can sense that I'm ready to give up, ready to stop running, ready to finally pay the price for surviving when others didn't. I've made arrangements. This document will be sent to the Anthropological Society of Canada upon my death, along with my journals and the few photographs we managed to take during that winter. Let people make of it what they will. Let them call me mad. Let them dismiss it as trauma or hallucination or folklore. At least the story will exist. At least someone will know what happened to the men who went north in 1904 and the creature that hunted them. To anyone reading this, if you ever find yourself in the Northern Territories, if you ever hear warnings about areas that are cursed or haunted or wrong, listen. Listen to the indigenous peoples who know these lands. Listen to the old stories. Listen to that voice in your head that tells you something isn't right. Because the Wendigo is real. It exists in the places where winter rules, where hunger gnaws at the soul, where isolation turns men into shadows of themselves. It is patient, and it is cruel, and it never, ever stops hunting. And if you're reading this because you've encountered it yourself, because you've seen it change faces, or heard it mimic voices, or felt its impossible cold, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry to tell you that you're marked now, that it will never fully let you go, that every winter for the rest of your life, you'll wonder if this is the year it comes for you. All I can offer is this: stay in the light. Stay among people. Don't let yourself become isolated in body or spirit. Fight the darkness and the cold and the hunger. Not just physical hunger, but the hunger for solitude, for giving up, for letting go. Because that's what the Wendigo feeds on. That's how it wins. Duncan gave up, accepted the isolation of his fate, and tried to face it alone. The Wendigo took him in 3 years. Pierre gave up, let the fear consume him until there was nothing left but paranoia and dread. The Wendigo took him in 7. Me? I'm still fighting, still holding on, still refusing to let it win without a struggle. Maybe that's why I've lasted 20 years. Or maybe I've just been lucky. Or maybe the Wendigo is saving me for last, letting me watch the others fall first, letting me understand that escape is impossible before it finally claims me. I don't know. And that's the worst part. The not knowing. Living each day uncertain if this is the day. Each winter uncertain if this is the winter. Each shadow uncertain if it's just a shadow or something worse. I'm reading this document now, 84 years after Jonathan Pierce wrote it. I'm Dr. Margaret Chen, an anthropologist specializing in indigenous legends of North America. And this manuscript was delivered to my university office last month, along with a note from the executor of an estate. Jonathan Pierce died on December 15, 1924, exactly 20 years after his encounter with what he called the Wendigo. He was found in his rented room in Toronto, frozen solid, despite the landlady insisting the radiator had been working perfectly. The room temperature when they found him was 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The coroner couldn't explain it. Listed cause of death as unknown, possibly cardiac event. But I know what happened to Jonathan Pierce. The same thing that happened to Duncan MacLeod and Pierre Duchamp. The same thing that happened to dozens of others who've reported encounters with similar creatures in the Northern Territories over the past century. The Wendigo is real. I know how that sounds coming from a scientist, from someone trained to value evidence and skepticism. But I've spent 40 years researching this phenomenon, collecting testimonies, documenting cases, trying to understand what these creatures are and why they haunt certain regions. What I've found has shaken my understanding of reality. There are documented cases going back centuries, different names: Wendigo among the Algonquian peoples, Wet'suwet'en among the Athabascan, Wetiko among the Cree, but always the same pattern. A creature of winter and starvation that hunts humans, that can change its face, that marks those who survive its hunt. Modern psychology tries to explain it as a cultural syndrome, a form of psychosis related to isolation and extreme conditions. But that doesn't explain the bodies found frozen in warm rooms, doesn't explain multiple witnesses seeing the same impossible creature, doesn't explain the pattern of deaths that follow encounters. I believe the Wendigo is a spirit of place, a manifestation of the harshest aspects of northern wilderness, the cold that kills, the hunger that drives men to cannibalism, the isolation that breaks minds. It exists at the intersection of physical reality and spiritual reality, in the liminal space where human understanding breaks down. And it's still out there. Last year, I received a report from a group of researchers working near Churchill, Manitoba. They'd been studying polar bear migration when they encountered something that matched Jonathan Pierce's description perfectly. A skeletal figure, 8 feet tall, with the ability to mimic human faces and voices. 3 of the 5 researchers died. The 2 survivors refused to speak about what happened, but I've seen their eyes. I recognize that haunted look. They're marked now, just like Jonathan was, just like Duncan and Pierre and all the others. The question I keep coming back to is, why? Why does the Wendigo hunt? Is it malicious? Or is it simply following its nature like any predator? Is it trying to warn us about something? About the dangers of greed, of pushing too far into pristine wilderness, of consuming without restraint? Or is it just hunger incarnate, existing only to feed, to hunt, to take? I don't have answers. All I have are these documents, these testimonies, these records of encounters that should be impossible, but undeniably happened. And a growing certainty that climate change is going to make things worse. As the Arctic warms, as permafrost melts, as ancient lands that have been frozen for millennia begin to thaw, what else might be released? What other spirits of ice and cold might find themselves displaced, angry, hunting for new territory? The indigenous elders I've spoken with all say the same thing. The old spirits are stirring. The balance is breaking. And humanity, in its arrogance, isn't prepared for what's coming. So I'm publishing this document, Jonathan Pierce's testimony. Let the academic community dismiss it as folklore or cultural artifact. Let the skeptics explain away the documented deaths, the unexplained freezing, the testimonies of credible witnesses. But I know the truth. And if you're reading this, and you're planning an expedition to the Northern Territories, or you're working in remote Arctic locations, or you're just curious about the legends of the Wendigo, consider this a warning. Listen to the indigenous peoples. Respect the boundaries they've marked through centuries of experience. Don't go into places they tell you are wrong or cursed or forbidden. Because the Wendigo is real. It has always been real. And it's still hunting. So that's the story of the 1904 Wendigo encounter. 6 men went into the northern Canadian wilderness seeking furs and fortune. 3 died in the winter, 3 escaped, and within 20 years, all 6 were dead. 3 from the cold and exposure, 3 from the creature that never stopped hunting them. What do you think? Do you believe the Wendigo is real? Do you think Jonathan Pierce and his companions actually encountered a supernatural entity? Or were they victims of extreme psychological trauma that manifested as shared delusion? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt watched in the winter woods, if you've ever heard your name called in a voice you recognize when you know you're alone, if you've ever seen a face in the crowd that shouldn't be there, maybe, just maybe, the Wendigo has marked you too. Remember, it's patient, it's cruel, and it never stops hunting. Stay in the light, stay among people, and never, ever go into the northern forests in winter alone. The Wendigo is waiting. It's always waiting. And winter always comes.